So today I want to cover a few things that I think matter, that we have only partly covered. So it's a mix of elements, some negative stuff, critical stuff, and then some positive stuff. I want you, there are certain, the last two classes, last class and this class, I will emphasize, last class I emphasized particular aspects that I want to make sure that you sort of really nail down, because I think they matter for your own knowledge, for the purposes of the class, etc. So some of the stuff that I talked about, the digital, which is a very different way of focusing on the digital from what you usually see, which is the latest developments and I don't know what. Some of the issues that have to do with inequality. You know, you have by now understood more or less my philosophy, if you want, what really matters, what we must know, and what might be secondary. So today I want to focus on issues of the environment. We have covered that in class. I just think this is important for, you know, it's the future. I think the environmental question is at the heart of the matter. Yes, finance is the other big beating heart, and as you know, I am a bit of a critic of that. Plastics, we all know about plastics, right? And we know that they are really bad, correct or not? We know that. No. Yeah. It's a planetary, this is not my study, by the way. This is a study of a bunch of scientists who have sort of produced, you know, here is all of that, and there is a lot more in the original site. Here is an image. These are bottle, plastic, all plastic bottles. So this is a planetary crisis. Where is it most at risk, and what damage does this plastic actually do? Now, I know that many of you know this, but I just want to make sure that we have some of this information sort of as a shared domain, if you want. So plastic as we know it has only really existed for the last 60 to 70 years. It's amazing that in such a short period of time, and remember there are vast parts of the world where you barely have any plastic. It is certain parts of the world where we have overdone it with the plastic. So that in just 70 years, we have managed to produce a catastrophic condition. Some of you have seen the images that I'm referring to, etc. So one of the advantages of plastics is that they're meant to have a very long life. Now, do we really need something that lasts 400 years to have a cup of coffee? That is what we're facing. I mean, this stuff will not die. So here you have, so here are some of the figures, right? How much plastic is there actually? 8.3 billion tons of virgin plastic. In other words, plastic that has been produced, etc., but that has not gone through all kinds of transformations. As of 2015, you can all read it there, right? Approximately 6.3 billion tons of plastic waste has been generated. So one thing is plastic, another thing is the plastic waste, right? 9% recycled. I should have asked you what you thought it might be. I was very surprised with this figure. I thought that we had managed to recycle more. 9% is truly pathetic. And 79% accumulated in landfills or the natural environment, with the ocean, of course, being one of them. If current, you can all read it, if current production and waste management trends continue, roughly 12 billion tons of plastic waste will be in landfills or the natural environment, which means in the air, in the water, mostly the water, by 2050. The scale up of this condition is enormous. You know, when you look at basic trends in the biosphere, you don't always see this kind of stuff. This is man-made stuff, and by God, our curve is far sharper, you know, than that of Mother Nature. Now, okay, blah, blah, here you have all of this is the source for those of you who want to look at it. Some 6.3 billion tons is now waste. So one thing is plastic that we wind up using. Another thing is that which actually, after using, becomes a waste that is almost indestructible. And 79% of that is in landfills or the natural environment. I said that already. 4 billion plastic bottles. So, the drinking, etc., etc. Some 480 billion plastic bottles were sold globally in 2016. It's monstrous. I don't know if you get that. I mean, this is truly extreme conduct that we are. That's 1 million bottles per minute. Of these, 120 billion were made by drinks giant Coca-Cola. I don't have anything against Coca-Cola. Well, I have a bit against Coca-Cola. But they, this is just one firm. There is a long list of other firms. These are quite amazing records. Anyhow, so drink bottles, a rising tide of plastic, 1 million are bought every minute, or 20,000 per second. 480 billion sold in 2016, we already did that. Less than 50% collected for recycling, actually far less than 50%. Only 7% turned into new bottles. Now, I would say, if there is a battlefield, there are many battlefields. I mean, it's sort of in the work, the work of battling something. This should be one of them, for many young people today, etc. How much plastic waste winds up in seas? I think many of you know that it is quite a bit. It's likely that about 10 million tons of plastic currently ends up in the ocean each year. Again, these are astounding figures. In 2010, scientists from the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis and the University of Georgia in Athens estimated the figure as 8 million tons and forecast that to rise to 9.1 million tons by 2050. So it's only going up rather than going down. The same study, blah, blah, surveyed 192 coastal countries contributing to ocean plastic waste and found that Asian nations were 13 of the 20 biggest contributors. Now here we have sort of a map very quickly, so you get a sense, of sort of high points. China, nothing against China, but anyhow, what can I say? China was top of the list of countries mismanaging public waste. US was top of the country of waste per person. I thought that was sort of an interesting juxtaposition, you see, where they're both number one, but on slightly different modes. I don't know which one is worse, but maybe the US. So plastic waste accumulates in areas of the ocean where winds, we know this too, some of you probably know this, create these swirling circular currents known as gyres. We have 5 major gyres, and several of them are asphyxiating because they capture, so they capture what is floating around. And they are just simply, they need to vomit it out, so to speak, but that's not, we do that. They don't, the gyres don't. So it is estimated debris takes about 6 years to reach the center of the North Pacific gyre from the coast of the US and about a year from Japan. So this is a process. We could intervene at many, it's not that it swallows it up, poof, suddenly it's gone. It's there and then it's gone. No, this is years of movement. And hence intervention would be very possible. All 5 gyres have higher concentrations of plastic rubbish than other parts of the ocean. These, by the way, are very well established facts and very well known facts also. I'm sure that quite a few of you are aware of these facts, but I think it's important, that everybody knows about it. They are made up of tiny fragments of plastic which appear to, this is very sort of interesting, which appear to hang suspended below the surface, a phenomenon that has led it to being described as plastic soup. Why that, I don't quite know, but it's sort of something that is floating right beneath the surface. The hard-wearing qualities of most plastics means that some items can take hundreds of years to degrade, to biodegrade. In other words, biodegrade is a positive moment, but 100 years of that and it keeps growing at this rate, it won't do. the moves to clean up the North Pacific Gyre, which is one that is highly compromised. This is an operation led by a nonprofit organization, Ocean Cleanup, for those of you who are interested. And it is a new organization. It's not for profit, and it begins in 2018. There have been a whole range of initiatives, but it's very difficult. Some of you must have the images also of these floating islands of garbage, right? You know what we're talking about. Now, how long till they are gone? Estimated time it will take to biodegrade, in other words. So here you have a few cases, right? So if you're looking at styrofoam cups, it takes 50 years. If you're looking at an aluminum can, it takes 200 years. If you're looking at a nappy, a little nappy, poor baby, can you imagine? 450 years. Now, I didn't produce these data. This was produced by scientists, so I'm assuming that they're right. I just find the nappy is something that you need for about half an hour, because once the baby has done its bit, you want to actually retire the dirty nappy, right? So those, whatever, half an hour of activity would 450 years. Is there no better way of doing that? I mean, nappies? No. Plastic bottle, the real baddies, also 450 years. This surprised me. Fishing line. Evidently, there's a lot of fishing lines in there. 600 years. All these fishermen, you know, who are, I mean, getting a fish out of there is good, but leaving the line behind is not so great. Now, one example here, it comes from the UK. The Marine Conservation Society found 718 pieces of litter for every 100-meter stretch of beach surveyed during the recent Great British Beach Cleanup. That was a 10% increase on last year. The numbers that we're talking about, and this is just a beach, a set of beaches that we're talking about, right? But when you put it all together, the figures are escalating. I mean, we've gone to this type of a curve now. Now, this is the UK, because this is a set of English, so this is a certain kind of question, a certain kind of data. What kind of waste appears on UK beaches? Now, I think actually that when I compare UK beaches with some of the American beaches, I think that the UK probably is a bit less bottles and cans than the UK, but this is still very, very high. So there you see it, the bottles, the packets, the glass items, the cigarette stubs, the caps and lids, pieces of everything. I mean, you mention it, it's there. Of course, you clean it up, but then you have to dispose it somewhere, etc. The origin of a lot of the litter is difficult to trace, so we don't know exactly. But the public, people, contributes about 30%. Not 80%, just 30%. So if we could diminish our own rubbish of that sort and use or reuse, if we have a plastic bottle, reuse it as much as we can. Sewage-related debris or items flushed down toilets that should have been put in the bin amounted to some 8.5%. Now, these are small percentages, but it is, it is a significant amount. And these are cases where we could prevent that. That particular thing we don't have to do. We can do it differently. So here is, where does the UK beach waste come from? Most of it is unknown. Fishing appears. Sewage-related debris, and then public, whatever that might mean exactly. Now, plastic, I think we all know why plastic is so particularly harmful. But let me just run through it, because this just, nails it down if you want. For seabirds and larger marine creatures like turtles, dolphins, and seals, the danger comes from being entangled in plastic bags and other debris, or mistaking plastic for food. These are all well-known conditions. Turtles cannot distinguish between plastic bags and jellyfish, which can be part of their diet. So they go for it because they think it's jellyfish. Plastic bags, once consumed, cause internal blockages and usually result in death. Larger pieces of plastic can also damage the digestive systems of seabirds and whales and can be potentially fatal. Over time, plastic slowly degrades and breaks down into tiny micro fragments. And that is something that has been very well publicized, that last part. I think everybody knows that. Now, here is sort of this cute little example. So what do we call that, a Qtip? So this looks, I'm not going to go through it all, okay? But this looks at this whole set of things that happens when we just casually drop one of those cotton butts, I guess they call it. Well, maybe that's a British pronunciation. But, you know, everything like that, you know, begins to create its own, you know, sort of scale up of negatives. And of course, we're talking millions probably, right, of these. So, and of course, fish and marine life cannot distinguish them from food. Now, most of this stuff really is deeply linked to urban situations. So we in the city, we have a chance, we have an opportunity. The city should become a space where everybody knows about this. Everybody's on alert, you know, where we combat it in whatever ways we can, because we urban residents are the key actors in this drama that plays out in a non-urban setting. Now, this is the whole question of land. And there is a whole debate going on, and I've done quite a bit of research on this now, which has to do with how a city produces, any city, enormous demands on the non-urban setting. And the use of land and the use of pesticides and the use of chemicals to make the plants grow bigger, et cetera, all of that is, at this point in time, deeply connected to urban conditions. Smallholders, you know what I mean by smallholders, right? Small agricultural people who really take care of the land. They don't treat the land the way, you know, big operations like big farms, you know, industrial level farms do. So we have a problem. We have a problem in our practices. We have a problem in how we produce what we need. We're going to have to change a lot of that. And here you can see quite a bit of difference between, so land requirement per gram of protein, right, in square meters. Now, the beef and mutton requires one square meter to get 1 gram, okay? Pork is already much better. I was surprised, I didn't know that. And then when you get to the this I don't know where this fits, but I am assuming that this is a highly, with a lot of chemicals, etc., to make the maize grow. But you know, the zero, they have the smaller ones, eggs, 0.2, etc. So an egg is a great protein, you know. You know that now in New York you can grow your chicken. I don't know if you grow chicken? You can have a chicken. I mean, I don't know who wants a chicken in their living room every day, but the chicken lays an egg. I didn't know that, by the way. Lays an egg every day. I don't know how they do that. Does anybody know? Is that normal or what? I mean, can you imagine an egg a day? More than one a day. I mean, we should all have chicken, frankly, especially, you know, in the light of all of this. But, yeah. Now, here I want to get at something else, just very quickly. This is a very quick review here. So the world's wealth inequality. So here are the top 8 rich blah blahs. These are all familiar figures. You have seen them in one version or another. I just want to make sure that, you know, it's ingrained in your brain. Have the equivalent wealth of the poorest 50% of the world. I would have thought that it would have been even more, frankly. But the 50% of the world, poorest of the world, also includes some modest middle classes, etc. So it gives you a sense. This is all, again, this is familiar stuff. But this is one way of representing it. And I just want to make sure that you have some of these, you know, these juxtapositions, if you want, in your head. Now, water stress. This is another big issue in the world. Here we have water stress by country. Now, notice the United States. It's stressed. And of course, the United States has water still. But the way, you know, right now you can have a good water supply, but the long-term trends are showing deep trouble. The other thing that is happening, I think I mentioned that already, and this is a very important fact, is that the big bottle bottlers, from Coca-Cola to Nestle, whether they're American or foreigners, they are getting access to vast amounts of the water in the United States. I'm just talking now about the United States. They're doing this also in other parts of the world, by the way, for almost zero price, zero. And they sell, you know, each bottle of water costs how much now? $5 or something like that? $2? $2? Oh, I exaggerated there? Okay, $2 still. These are all modes in which we are handling the biosphere that are unsustainable in an extraordinarily deep way. They are really, we cannot go on this way. It's going to be very tough to change, and you would think that cities are places where new trends can be established, and you are beginning to see that. But still, it's just, we're far, far from it. And ultimately, one of the reasons I'm covering all of this environmental destruction stuff is that cities, you have heard me talk about it, I don't want to repeat what I have said, every surface in the city should be working with the biosphere. And I have talked to you, I know, about a bacterium, for instance, lots of bacterium stories, a bacterium that you put on concrete, just on concrete, not on this kind of stuff. And as it lives its life, a bacteria is a live thing, not dead bacteria, I'm talking live bacteria. As it lives its life in that concrete, it deposits a calcium that seals off the surface of that concrete, and so stops, you know, bad emissions, and eventually actually begins to actively purify the air right around that. So it doesn't spread very far, but it becomes, you know, if each concrete surface, whether vertical or horizontal, is working that way, eventually you have little islands of clean air. Now, this kind of surface is a real problem. We don't know how to handle this. But when it comes to a whole set of biological forms of life, it's quite extraordinary what the scientists have found can actually work to protect the environment. And I have, in my own research, produced a fairly long list of what we know. And this is stuff that we have to begin to engage. Now, there are countries that are already doing it. Another one is, I think I mentioned that here, and countries like Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands are already using this, which is a bacterium that if you put it in brown waters, you know what I'm talking about, organic brown waters that we produce in kitchens and bathrooms and all kinds of other settings, actually begins to, again, clean that water, etc. And, you know, we have to begin to deploy these kinds of capabilities because, you know, it's one of the few ways in which we can get some traction because things are really sort of out of control. So, oh, I'm sorry, and that bacterium produces did I already mention that, kind of a molecule of a plastic that is biodegradable but resistant, so that it will eventually degrade, but in the meantime, it is functioning, and it captures a negative and transforms it into a positive. Are you with me on what I said or not? I think this is critical stuff that the scientists have been working on, have produced amazing issues, and then you see so many planners in cities or architects simply, they just don't even know this stuff. Many do know, I will say that. But there are so many ways in which we could be actually doing some good work. Also the whole notion of how to use wood. You know, we have had a practice, we use wood, we paint it, right? And I'm talking about wood that is facing the outside, not the inside. So we paint it. Do you think that that's a smart thing to do? No. Wood knows how to be outside, confronted to the climate, right? You don't paint it over, then you weaken it. And so now you have a whole set of architects who are building with wood, and they put the concrete or whatever they need to give resistance and also to against fires, they put it on the inside. But on the outside, you have the wood, because the wood actually knows how to handle and live with climate. It degrades less. You don't need all kinds of sort of artificial covers, that we use. So anyhow, I could go on and on. You can tell that I'm really into this stuff, and there is a lot. So here we have seen the water stress, right? You have seen it right now. And so this is totally different subject. We're just covering all kinds of things. This is the Global Slavery Index. How many of you are aware of this index? Okay, this is serious stuff. You know that we have slaves today. This notion that we were done with slavery is simply a myth. It's a very different form of slavery from older modes, but it is there. And cities are one key space. You probably have walked past an enslaved person in New York City, in one situation or another. And there are many different modes in which this happens. And one mode is desperate people who feel a bit safer doing everything for no money for a household. So that is the most benign form. That's like refuge at the cost of extraordinarily high work. At that end, it's absolutely disastrous, brutal. But it is a range. It's a modern kind of slavery. You cannot compare it, say, with the slave plantations that we had in the United States. But there is now a lot of evidence. This is research that began to take place years ago. Nobody believed it. And now we have really quite a bit of data. There is a lot of enslavement of men. The fishery industry, I hope I don't offend anybody here, of Thailand and some other countries in the region, they have male slaves. And when we have found I've not, but we know, I have done research about this, they have unearthed graves where those, indentured men who were working in the fishing industry were too old to serve. They just killed them. This was a scandal that broke about 2 years ago in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Malaysia. So weird stuff is happening in the world. And cities are one space where you have, all extremes actually taking place. And I want to sort of remind us that the city is also the space where those without power get to make a history, get to make an economy, like a little economy, a neighborhood economy, get to make a culture. So the city is a very complex animal in this world of ours. And this world of ours, when I use that phrase, I mean stuff is changing. This is, a lot of the stuff that used to be more benign is getting very harsh, and vice versa. There are also freedoms that are being fought for and that it's working, they're succeeding. So the city is a site full of contradictions. Rural areas tend to be more monochromatic. It's either one thing or the other. The city is a space, where you can make those without power, I repeat, get to make a history. And so that makes it interesting. Now, these figures that you see here, some of that is happening in cities, some of that is happening in rural areas. But the estimate is actually that most of it is happening in cities. So that is also a disturbing element. Here's another darling, right. So murder rates in the US, we didn't talk about this in class, but I do think it's part of the urban story today. Certainly in countries like Brazil, in countries like the United States, in a certain type of country, this is very serious stuff. It's not just the United States. Now, gun death in the US, this is an amazing data. I couldn't resist putting this, that gun death in the United States has killed more than all the dead from wars. So that again tells you, this gun epidemic, that is a very urban thing. It's not only urban, but it happens in cities. Cities are a key place for this kind of stuff. And we have got to recognize that the city, both in its freedoms that it gives us, our possibilities, also produces a lot of negatives. I still think that a city is an important kind of unit, you know, for a certain type of life, a life of freedom, a life of experimenting, a life of innovating, etc., etc. It's very difficult to do outside of an urban site. But it also comes with a very heavy price. Now here, this is stuff that with the United States is the most extreme case. It's not the only one, but it is definitely one of the most extreme ones. So more Americans have died from guns in the United States since 1968 than on the battlefields of all wars in American history. Now, I didn't put this data together, but this tells you something. This tells you that, you know, the question of guns, the question of killing, the question of your neighbor, who is the only one that you have access to in order to get angry with, this is serious stuff. And so cities are not angelical places. Cities are challenging sites. So you have seen all of this. Now I want to give you something totally very different, and I'm beginning to conclude here. I just want to imagine, think of Greater Tokyo, so totally different subject. Greater Tokyo versus Greater London. So what do you think? How do those compare? You know, London is a vast city. I've talked about it, right? It's not like Manhattan. It's, of course, the New York is more than Manhattan, but still, it's not that concentrated. People have that image sometimes. So London is huge and Greater Tokyo is huge. So which one do you think is bigger? And at what order? Anybody? Yes? Tokyo by a lot or by a little? By a lot. Who agrees that Tokyo is bigger by a lot? Aha, you're a minority. So you think that Tokyo is either bigger but by a little, or that London, who thinks that London is bigger? Aha, okay. So, this is London, this is Greater London. And this is not, the Greater Tokyo area is not in England, okay? But this is like a way of getting a sense. Look at that. That is a surprise, right? Now, it must be said that Greater London is big. It's very big. But that is enormous. And of course, they have a huge population, a vast concentration of extraordinary rapid transit. If this were, well, I don't know about New York. New York is not that big either, but you know, New York is so broken up into separate entities. But I know many places that could not handle this kind of size. You know, they could handle this. And again, Greater London is very big. Huh? It's not a tiny thing. Anyhow, that is just to capture something about the many differences that you see in how cities constitute sort of their primary urban space. You know, the biggest urban space that they have. And all cities tend to do that. But what comes out, the results, tend to be rather different. Now, here, I wanted to remind you of something that I talked about, which has to do with the buying of urban properties by all kinds of actors. And they're often underused, which raises a question, what is happening? Are we just seeing the buying of property? And you may recall or not recall my lecture on that subject. No, we're not just seeing the buying of property. So this is 65,000 buildings in Greater London, all owned by shell companies. I don't mean shell as in oil. I mean shell as in fictitious companies that we don't know who they are, that are outside of the UK. This is an extreme version of something that is happening in many cities, many major cities. New York has that too. I showed you some images about New York too. But this is the most extreme one. London, it's sort of, there is an irony there, given its imperial history. I mean, London was everywhere in the world, not I exaggerate, but in many places in the world. It has forever sort of the bridges that were built during empire to go into the colony, so to say, well, those bridges still exist, and they're getting used also in the reverse dimension. So a lot of emptiness, a lot of unknown ownership, a lot of vague something, what is this about? And of course, there are people who are trying to understand why. Can you think of what could be some of the reasons? Why are you buying a building that you then don't use in a rather expensive city like London? Money laundering, right. Money laundering, investment is a way of also laundering your money, of course, right? But the truth of the matter is that it is a lot of that. There is a lot of, the concentrations of capital, of wealth that we have all heard about. They do also play out in cities, and this is one modality, and I think I mentioned that. And this is the other modality, right? So you clean your money, whoever you got it, you don't want to tax it, or it's a bit irregular, whatever. You build the new property. And then the issue that is also happening, in New York, we have quite a few of these buildings. These are real buildings. They are 70, 80% or more unoccupied. This raises the question, why did they do that? How are they making their money? And I talked to you about what this could mean, and we know we have a bit of evidence what it does mean. Does anybody remember? There's a bit of a complicated story. They use the actual building. The empty building gives them more profit than if they rented or sold it out. Why? Because they can keep on using it every day, several times, to produce an asset-backed security. Now, this is not good for a city, you understand, but it's good, evidently, for the investors. So when you see these empty buildings, and they're getting emptier, actually, they are delivering the goods. In principle, whether that is so or not every day, I don't know, but in principle, they can generate continuous wealth in a 24-hour cycle, continuously, because it's all abstract. It's all functioning in a very abstract zone. So this just produces an asset. It could be the windows, it could be this wall, it could be one of the flats. This is an extreme version of financializing property. And of course, you want it empty then, because you don't have to deal with anything. So this means that you could have a city, densities built. This is an extreme image, but this is sort of, it goes a bit in that direction, with empty buildings and a lot of very rich and happy investors. Now, a city with lots of tall buildings that are empty, or even a few are empty, is of course a very problematic concept. I would say that barely is a city. If you think of a city as a complex, my definition, remember, I gave it to you way, way back, the city is a complex but incomplete system. It always needs incompleteness. That is why the poor can come, the migrants can come, the rich can come, the foreigners can come, the whatever can come, right? But that complexity needs to be kept. This is a weird kind of complexity that does not affect really the urban environment. On the contrary, it simplifies the urban environment. So you're actually losing something. So this is truly, as you may have understood by now, a negative. We have some of this also in London. And I'm hearing from people, I have sort of a network, that we're seeing it in Amsterdam, we're seeing it in Sao Paulo, we're seeing it in quite a few places. So it's an emergent condition. Now, again, I gave you these figures already. So the top 100 cities, this is just one particular segment. The top 100 cities by property investment account for 10% of the population. I mean, they're measured, again, by property investment, okay, not by size, not by, just by the amount of property investment. They account for 10% of the world's population, 30% of the world's GDP, and 76% of property investment. You may recall that I mentioned that investment here is not quite, this is the language that is used, but what it is really is a financializing of these properties. Okay, 70% of property, yeah, it's an investment, but you're extracting actually. You're not putting in money, you're extracting. So it's an odd way. The 76% here refers to a very select, small number of all the properties in the world. So this is not, most properties are little properties, or they're university properties or whatever, they are not in play. This is a very particular market. So these figures is about those top 100 cities, etc., by investment. So it's a very partial moment. New York has far more buildings that have nothing to do with this than it does buildings that are caught in this kind of financializing circuit. All right, I just want to make sure that that's clear. And according to Savills, who looks at the whole world, properties that are part of this investment circuit actually account for 217 trillion. Now that is much more than the GDP of all the countries in the world. This is weird. This is really weird, you understand? I mean, I understand what they're doing. I hope you have now understood. But it's weird in the sense that, wow, this is different. So I should say maybe different. This is different, right? So I just want you don't need to know the details, you don't need to know the figures. You just need to know these new modes in which the urban condition is getting used. This is the end, sort of, getting to the end. Oh, this is something that a friend of mine, who has heard of Ashamin? I usually put him on the reading list. I don't think that I did this year. Anyhow, he's a geographer. So, surviving the future. This is his slide. So here is a bit more of this data. So 600 cities, McKinsey, 600 cities housing 20% of the world population will generate 60% of global GDP in 2025. The next 400 only add. In other words, what are we seeing here? A significant concentration of certain types of cities and certain types of developments in cities that account for a disproportionate share of global GDP. That is not good. You want far more distributed, you want, and so again, what I've been talking about is one way of making them work. Very problematic way, this financializing. Now, according to Kearney, world geopolitical power is concentrated in 20 cities. Now, Kearney is McKearney or T. Kearney, whatever. They are, a consultancy. They have very smart people. They're absolutely good, but they also are a business operation. So according to them, the world geopolitical power is concentrated in 20 cities. So New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Los Angeles, Seoul, Brussels, Washington, Singapore, Sydney, Vienna, and Beijing. Vienna is a surprise there. I don't know if you know. Vienna is also the home of many of the international treaty institutions. That puts Vienna there. So it becomes, it's a connector to the world in a way. Because when you go through Vienna, you just don't have the sense that it is like, say, Manhattan. Certainly not. Now, UN Habitat, the world urban population rising from 50 to 70% by 2030, 80% of which in the developing world cities, with 1.2 billion living in slums. Not great. Urban areas occupying 2% of the Earth's surface. You have all seen the map, right? Which shows how concentrated all urban settings are in particular areas. So occupying 2% of the Earth's surface account for 60 to 80% of global energy consumption and 75% of CO2 emissions. Unsustainable for people and for the biosphere. So this kind of concentration that we have it's problematic. I've already talked early on about the edges of slums. A working slum right around the central city is one thing, but the edges of a huge slum, there you see the degradation. There something is really falling apart and is an absolute negative. So you can have a working slum, okay, but then the other part, not okay. Oh, here, okay, now here is all pretty. Pretty doesn't need much of an explanation. Nice ways of doing. Oh, this is not so pretty, but anyhow, this is very state-of-the-art. More state-of-the-art. Here, all kinds of things. Hybrid associations. So this is very nice stuff. Actually, this is all real. You can all, if you are really interested, you can go to the site for the class, right? These are all different versions, innovations, thinking urban parts, not parks, but parts. So it goes on and on. Oh, that is me. I didn't know that. That is it, because these are the slides of, I told you, of Amin. All right. Yes, of course. Isn't that all beautiful? It's just beautiful, yes. I really like that. I would say it again. And so here I'm leaving you with these final images, and this is sort of ending with a kind of a sweet wildness. Do you know these figures? They are wonderful. They are by an artist. This kind of, can you see it well there in the back? These are wild imageries. This is also what a city can inspire, an artist. This, you see these sort of, they do something to it. It's not just sitting in a gallery, so to say. And then this is, I think, yeah, that's the final one. I'll leave you with that. People, it has been a pleasure to teach you. I hope you learned something. And to the next one. Thank you. And I want to thank all the TAs who stand up. I know that one of you is in the back, etc. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.